Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai and welcome to the Yogananda podcast, where we talk everything Yogananda and SRF. You've joined us on Chapter 8, Part 3 of the Autobiography of a Yogi line by line coverage, where we're going into everything that is covered in the Autobiography of a Yogi. You can read along with us on this journey. We're going to be covering from in time the leading scientific societies of the world accepted my theories and results. And we're going to certainly try to get through today all the way down to the last sentence of tears stood in my eyes at this scientist's concluding words, his patience. And I'll not read on because it's such a such a powerful last sentence, but we're going to read down to there. If you would like to pause and read along with us, please do feel free to do so. So we do continue on from the last part that Lauren kindly took us through. We're looking at the speech, really, and the conversation of Jagadish Chandra Bose, who is renowned as the father of modern science in India, in the subcontinent of India. So a very significant individual. And Yogananda has had the benefit of speaking to him, and he's thought it's so significant that he's bringing this whole chapter to us. So, it's been great actually doing a bit more research into who this individual was and what the institute that he founded did and is doing today. So we're going to delve into that in a little bit more detail later in the show. But for now, we're looking at this speech that Bose is giving. And really, he's coming out with so many significant statements. And Yogananda has compressed a much longer speech that he gave. And Yogananda compressed it for us. So we're seeing a more condensed version of a longer speech. So every line is just punchy, and it's just so significant, every single line that he says. And really, there's an extract in this article that Yogananda has decided to share with us by a professor of the Pennsylvania University called Professor W. Norman Brown, which appeared in the 1939 May edition of the Bulletin of American Council of Learned Societies, Washington, D.C. And essentially, really what the professor here is saying that India's contribution to science is so significant that he thinks that there should be a individual, particularly in the humanities, in every major university that should be equipped with properly trained specialists knowledge in the Indic phases of its discipline. And so this is what Bose is suggesting himself as well, that in time, leading scientific societies around the world accepted his theories and results, which is fantastic to hear, because he was having some problems with that initially when he first broke into the scene, in the bioinformatics scene. But later, he was recognized and his work was recognized by the importance of the Indian contribution to science. So here we have in this Council of Learned Societies, American Council of Learned Societies article that Professor Norman Brown is indeed concurring with him. Priyank, come to you.
Yeah, he mentions in the first sentence that the Indic phase of discipline is something that's really needed. Doesn't really elaborate. Now, Professor Norman Brown, he's like an expert in Sanskrit and India and history of India. So I was wondering what he could be referring to as to Indic phases of discipline. I don't know. Tapas is potentially one of them. It's like what's the word? It's like striving, bit of that, sacrifice, austerities, just wondering what other disciplines in the Indic phase or that Guruji perhaps talks about that could be relevant here.
Looking at everybody else for an answer. I'm not going to give I did, when I first read it, it's one of those things that I nodded along when I read it, thinking, yeah, I agree. But actually, when you do stop to think about the Indic phases of its discipline, it's a lot more harder to grasp, I think.
Yeah. Well, Matt, the next line is equally provocative, I think, a little bit. We believe too that every college which aims to prepare its graduates for intelligent work in the world, which is to be theirs to live in, must have basically be confident in the civilization of India. But the first bit of that, prepare its graduates for intelligent work, is something that's a bit of a bugbear of mine, because most of certainly the UK's education system is about preparing the person to pass the exam versus preparing the person to be intelligent in any phase or walk of their life. I mean, they try and make a big song and a dance about extracurricular activity and all that kind of stuff, but really that gets you, in terms of like getting to university, they literally only care about your grade that you achieved. And I love that he's suggesting here that that should not be the way that we do our education.
We're going to talk about a couple of universities that are mentioned in this part of the chapter later on, and maybe that will actually give us some more insight as to how India had approached study, higher levels of study. Certainly in the West, I think it is criticized of trying to produce good workers, isn't it? And that was sort of part and parcel of what it was trying to do for a long time. But Yogananda himself, very passionate about this subject, isn't he? Creating the how to live schools. And so, it's something that's close to Guruji's heart, this subject.
Well mentioned, how to live schools. A lot of self-relationship fellowship classes that are published on YouTube, they've always got like the how to live quote in the title, class on how to live, or whether it's the guru disciple relationship or meditation or love, or all those things that they have got videos on. But the other thing that I mentioned here was that the universities must have on its staff a scholar competent in the civilization of India. So we mentioned that this Professor Brown was a bit of an expert in India. So no wonder he would be fascinated and inspired by the universities that you talk about, that we're going to talk about later, Chris. But also that, so it could be that he's talking about that in terms of its pure history of India, but he could also be referring here to the method of the civilization in terms of how they imparted education and knowledge. For example, there was a strong oral tradition of passing down knowledge through repetition of a specific mantra. So then it would be remembered as opposed to written down or on a stone tablet somewhere, and it would be remembered very precisely. And this part of that is because Sanskrit lends itself well to memorizing things, because it's very poetic, and depending on who the author of the verse is, you can make it very rhythmic and lots of like rhyming things in there, and really romantic kind of language. You can only compare it to like poetry, that in the Western poetry that's really like punchy in terms of being very easy to memorize.
Yeah, and that sentiment, I think, is reflected in what is said in this paragraph. Now, again, as I said, there's so much power in his words. He mentions Bose. He goes on to say, can anything small or circumscribed ever satisfy the mind of India? And I think this is where we'll ultimately finish in this podcast. It's linked to that, isn't it? Where he's indicating, his true passion and love for the people of India, and their inquisitiveness of mind, that he does talk about time and time again. I think that's probably the theme for me, this idea of satisfying the mind, using the mind in the pursuit of truth and discovery. And so he says, by a continuous living tradition, and a vital power of rejuvenance, this land has readjusted itself through unnumbered transformations. So he's saying essentially that the struggle, he goes on to talk about the struggles and the realizations in life actually comes through this active struggle, and that one should not be weak and refuse the conflict, but rise to the challenge, use the mind as a tool to be able to forge a way through life, and discover what the truth is of the reality around us. And he talks here, I love this word. He uses the victorious experience. So he says, one who can enrich the world by bestowing the fruits of his victorious experience. And he's almost talking about himself in many ways here, because he's done so much to really kind of carve the way, clear the path for others to follow in his intellectual pursuit, and the wielding of his mind. So I did think to myself, well, if anyone's going to say that, it's certainly going to be him, because he's done so much for India.
Yeah, he's being a pioneer is not easy, right? You have to go against the grain a little bit. And I'm sure when he started this, there wasn't really this tradition of big scientific work. And he often mentions that he admires the way the West at the time was doing science. So he kind of took the best of both worlds, merged it together. And if you want, you could draw a connection between him and landing a lunar lander on the far side of the moon, right? Because this is where it all started. And one funny story is that one of his students was Sisir Kumar Mitra, right? Who is also a very famous scientist. And both of them, Jagadish Chandra Bose and Mitra, have craters named after them on the moon. And the lunar lander landed near the Mitra crater and took pictures of it when they landed. So, boom, there's some connection.
Nice knowledge bomb there. I really loved the line, by a continuous living tradition, and then later on, the land has readjusted itself through unnumbered transformation. One, because it is one of the few civilizations that continued pretty much as it was, even though it's had so many transformations. And as we record this, India is going through its own transformation of whether or not it should change its name to its ancient name, which is Bharat, and which is more commonly used in day-to-day people into the hearts of India. That's a name. So even now it's going through its quietly going through its transformations. But the other thing I liked here was that he says that the realization of the highest ideals of life, as Chris read, not through passive renunciation, but through active struggle. And I found a good little clip here that we're going to play. So just listen to this.
It was so when we were watching the DVD In His Presence with Sri Malini Mataji. In one passage, she was describing an experience she had. She said to Guruji, "I am willing to die for your work." And the response she felt was, "To die for my work is easy. Are you willing to live for my work?" Couldn't top master, you see.
Which rings true here because passive renunciation would just be like, oh, I give it all up to God and let God do the work that needs to be done in the world. And that's obviously, in many ways, it's admirable, but in many ways it's the cop-out approach when there's so much work to be done. And here, as he says, that it's not through passive renunciation, but through active struggle. And all of us know something of that active struggle, I'm sure, every day in each one of our meditations.
Yeah, it's such a profound subject that, I would hope that, just thinking back to the convocation, it's a big subject that could be talked about really there by, a monk, and really delved into in Powers the Part, or maybe we could do a special on it someday as well, on Guruji's talks and teaching and things like that. So he's hitting a very important, hinting on a very important subject. And he does go on to talk about the lab's success, and really there is a lot of success still ongoing to this day, that we'll touch on shortly. And Mike sort of hinted toward how the Bose Lab does still impact society in even a bigger way today than what it was in Guruji's day. And really here we can see that the Bose laboratory has, opened up all sorts of inquiries in, physics, physiology, medicine, agriculture, and even psychology, not just in the revelations in the plant life, in the bioinformatics space. And it's quite a beautiful ripple effect then that they're having. And there is a lot of information on this. We can link to the Bose Institute site, where they actually have, announcements. They have academic research published there, and all the publications are on the site. So if you are partial to hearing more about it, do feel free to jump on their site and check it out. So really the success, there's a great line here that Bose uses. He says, but high success is not to be obtained without rigid exactitude. And that's such a great line, because I feel that's what Guruji talks about a lot with Kriya yoga and the practice of yoga in general. It has to be done with exactitude. And here we have Bose saying the exact same thing for the scientific study.
Do you feel like that he mentions Jagadish Chandra Bose in his book because he often says that yoga is a science, meditation is a science, and that everything is very exact in God's universe, in God's creation. So if you put the right formulas together, you will get the exact right response or result. And so maybe that's also part of being a yogi, that you have to be exact with everything, with your practice and with the things you do, the things you feel like, how you do your meditation practice, like every little detail counts, and then you experiment with it, and then you improve your results like that. So in a way, a yogi is like a kind of divine scientist of his own realization.
Always wanted to be a scientist.
There you go.
Take it. Yeah, the science of yoga, as Yogananda says, I think it is quite true. Correct?
Yeah, that high success that we're talking about, and the rigid exactitude that's required, as is the line, is really kind of a mantra for SRF, isn't it? Is keep the teachings pure is one thing, but how closely can you follow the practices as they're described? Because I personally find every single meditation, like every single class that we have on technique review, there's always something that I've strayed into a habit of not doing correctly, or was never doing correctly because my interpretation was wrong all the time, or doing it slightly better, or not doing it because you think you've already got that. So there's always that. But if we do it as that's described here with rigid exactitude, then our success you'd describe is assured. And in the previous paragraph, it says like he alone who has striven and won can enrich the world by bestowing the fruits of his victorious experience. So we can only enrich the world essentially after we've become, we've won, through our rigid exactitude, and then we're able to share the best of ourselves.
One of my favorite Guruji quotes is, "If you practice 1% of what I teach you, you will find God." It's always very comforting. Even 1% is a lot, I would say.
Yeah. Not an insignificant percent. Yeah, I do find, Frank, just to go back to what you were saying there, you almost read what you want to read in some sense. You read it and you go, hold on a second, I could have sworn. Oh, no, it doesn't say that. It says something very specific, and that's, you have to go back time and time again. And Guruji's obviously foreseeing that, because he does tell us to take our time to read it, digest it, to really, live the words, and take it with exactitude as well. Frank, do you want to jump in there?
Well, I was going to go to the next line, but you can go to that after B.
The long battery of sensitive instruments. Yeah, it is so good looking at the images that they have on the site that I think I'll link to the listeners to say to go check it out, because there's so much to see from back in Bose's day. The instruments that he had, the size of them, the scale of them, the number of them. So they're all there on the website to check out. So we can link to anyone who wants to go and check them out for themselves to the website.
And as with any museum, you get an insight into what really happens there, even if you can't be the one that's pioneered it or come up with it or even do the analysis. You can get into that frame where you can experience what he was experiencing in his discoveries, because like in the previous paragraph here, he says that they managed to discover unexpected revelations in plant life that extended into every regions of like physics, physiology, medicine, and agriculture. So it's like really broad, and like it's the impact of those works is you can't underestimate them, because like even terms in science such as like plant and neurobiology is a distinct discipline now, because of the work and the discoveries that Bose did. So he created disciplines after his discoveries, and similarly, like current discoveries or the technology that we use for radio waves and coherers and solid state physics comes back to those discoveries that Bose did. So like you wouldn't say, oh, Bose is the person that is behind the computer or all these advanced silicon chips, but if he hadn't done all those things, then it wouldn't have led to all the follow-on discoveries. But the biggest thing, I think, is the multidisciplinary approach that you now take when you do subjects. Before, it was probably very narrow. When you're doing your studies, it was probably like, this is what you study, this is what you specialize in. Whereas now, like, everything is like blended, like and you can study, if you study natural sciences, you can talk about the blending of like physics and biology and other fields and things like that.
And he does say just that, essentially what you're talking about. He says, like, this is really quite significant, what is in front of you. And I think it's quite a nice perspective, really, that he's trying to give to us here, and why Guruji's relaying it to us, which is the strife, the human toil, the persistence, the resourcefulness called forth to overcome human limitations, as he says here in this paragraph. And he says, you can take that from just looking at what we've produced here, all these mechanics and instruments, like it is very significant in its analogy, or as a almost like a metaphor of human strife. So he recognizes it almost on that philosophical level as well. So yeah, the scientific implications are huge, but certainly from a philosophical element, it's really significant as well. And I just looking at the times of when he was born 1858 and passed in 1937. There's so much innovation, so much revelation coming through in the scientific community around the world at that time. And my favorite time, because it's the relative to the yugas, always have to try to drop the yugas in there. The Dwapara Yuga kicked off, so that's it's all very significant. It's all God's work essentially being manifested through people like Bose and others. So really, really nice stuff. And he says again, this theme, he states here, all creative scientists know that the true laboratory is the mind, where behind illusions they uncover the laws of truth. Wow. That's a beautiful statement there from Bose. I don't have anything to add to it. So
I think if we study that sentence, if it didn't have the word creative, I think it would be a completely different flavor. So the creativity element of scientists, I think, is really important, as opposed to just studying science just to, commercial success, or because this is your scope of your research, etc. Being creative is, I think, a really operative word there, and that is the goal, I think, for all of our educational establishments that we have, and even the majority of the roles that important roles in technology, in industry as well. It's the ideal, isn't it? But that's not necessarily what we have today. What we usually have today is, this is what I'm employed for, this is what I'll do, and then I'll go home. People rarely push the envelope, and then when they do, their management usually says, no, this is your scope. nothing more. But yeah, it's really important.
Are you defining career scientists versus
nice versus creative scientists? Yeah.
I wouldn't be so negative about our current science. I think we're actually making amazing new discoveries all the time by people who are very creative. And I think creativity is something that you would not expect as an important skill as a scientist, because when you learn theory, a lot of it is theory in science, right? You think it's so dry, and it's kind of the opposite of something that a creative person would have done. But I think the creativity is involved in how to set up an experiment, how taking all the knowledge you have, go through it in your mind and just try to make sense of it, try to create a theory that kind of makes all the kind of results of experiments that you have made, incorporates all of them. And it's very difficult, and of course it's never right, it's never quite right. You're always a bit closer to the truth, but you never actually reach it. And so it's very entertaining if you are, I feel like those really highly skilled scientists, they're very special people, because they have an incredible imagination, and they don't need to write this all down. They constantly they wake up in the morning, in the shower, all they think of is all their kind of theories, colliding against each other. And then when they come up with an idea, then it's on such a high level that it is very hard to explain to someone who doesn't have all the background knowledge. And I guess it's easy to have a disconnect between someone who just made a breakthrough discovery and someone who doesn't know anything about the field, and then explaining it to them, it's tough, and then it sounds dry.
My wife, sorry, no, Mike, you're such a glass half full person, aren't you?
There you go.
I was referring to the potential of humanity versus the areas where we've had so much success, which obviously there is lots of areas. My wife and I were discussing exams the other day, university exams, and she was saying, oh, she didn't ever look at past papers because they usually give a very good indication as to what's coming up in the next paper, and it's a legitimate method of studying. And I said, oh, I never copied anyone's coursework or looked at anyone else's coursework when I did my own. And then we were comparing notes there. But I found it funny because she said something like, the process of learning when you're just doing it fresh without being constricted by what's in the exam is so different to just freely learning the subject, because it then takes you to all new vistas. And that was an interesting conversation we're having about this very topic.
Yeah, and it's kind of why I insist in saying to the listeners, like, pause and read along with us, because the insights that we have just by reading ourselves, this beautiful book that Yogananda has put together for us is going to be different. I'll look at it and think one thing, Frank will think another thing, and that's a great thing, isn't it? And then we come together and we share everything. So if any listeners, they'll have their own unique insight as well. So that's great to share. Mike, whenever you were talking there, I got the image of the Higgs boson collider, and it was really quite cool. Like when you were talking about scientists being creative and having thoughts, going around, and essentially they collide, and something that is created from that collision of thoughts and ideas, and it was a beautiful little imagery that popped into my head for that. So thanks. And the most creative person I know, I should say for the record, is my wife. My wife is a scientist, so she's a PhD. She's a doctorate. So I should agree with you, Mike, not to be so negative points because I'm married to one. So,
well, it sounds like she's in the room.
I'm saying just in case.
You should have said it louder, Chris.
like
Yeah. What I did notice, Prank, just whenever you pulled out a word then from that statement, all creative scientists, is another one at the end where it says, where behind illusions they uncovered the laws of truth. Now that word illusions is something that I think is probably quite fitting to somebody of India, or we saying Bharat now, where we talk about Maya and the illusions of Maya quite often, don't we? That word is linked. Whenever I think of illusions, I think of Maya, the illusions of Maya. So there's that word thrown in there, and I think the significance of that word to me is very relevant for who it came from, as opposed to if you heard a maybe Westerner talk, it might be the phenomena, the phenomena of life, or something slightly different, but certainly it has a different connotation behind it whenever you read it.
Illusions is quite an emotive word for scripture as well, in terms of its relation to Maya, and that fits as well here, like where behind Maya they uncover the laws of truth. So it's like grasping truth in essence there. But the previous paragraph previous sentence you feel like it could go next, but they put it previously. So the previous sentence talked about what the apparatus, what all the experiments, what they achieved, and it said they tell you of the protracted effort to get behind the deceptive seeming into the reality that remains unseen, and the continuous toil and persistence and resourcefulness called for to overcome human limitations. So it's essentially saying you do this is the 1 + 2 + 3 approach to get 6, to get to uncover the most profound mysteries of God's creation, isn't it?
Yeah, and he's definitely punching a big hole in this Maya, this field of Maya for everybody's sort of peer through, isn't he? And he does continue with more innovation, states of innovation, altruism, and acceptance, of the academic world. And so we'll look at this next statement, which Priyank you touched on before, where Bose himself says that the lectures given here will not be mere repetitions of second-hand knowledge, and that's a powerful statement. So you're not going to just maybe attend, the institution, go there and regurgitate something that someone, a time ago has learned. You're going to embark on new fields of research, and it's going to be pioneering, and it's quite visionary. It would be very inspiring to, if you were a scientist, you would want to go there and work alongside somebody like this, because they're the real trailblazers of history. So the announcements, these new discoveries that he mentions, that will reach the whole world now. What are they? He does say through regular publication. I did mention at the beginning of the podcast, we can link to the website. We do encourage people to check it out for themselves. There's so much there. We simply just wouldn't have time to go through it all. But there are a lot of significant moments in more recent history that we can read out. So maybe, Priyank, you would be kind enough to kick us off on some of the achievements and
yes. Sure. The Institute also has a Center of Excellence in Bioinformatics, which was established in 1988 with funding from the Department of Biotechnology from the government.
Lauren, would you continue on?
The division's research interests include evolutionary bioinformatics, stem cell bioinformatics, and regulatory RNAs. This is one I always I trip up a little bit on this one. Oncogenomics. Someone's going to be able to pronounce that one correctly. Proteomics, drug design, structural bioinformatics, and macromolecular dynamics.
Well done. That was fair. I
Thank you.
Do that. I didn't want to
You
read
feel
that
the pain.
I didn't want to read that myself. Thank you, Lauren. Mike, what's going on recently at the Bose Institute?
All right. So in March 2023, the Institute announced that it had received a grant of 1 million from the 1 million euros from the European Union to support its research on quantum technologies. This funding will be used to develop new quantum sensors and devices that could have applications in areas such as secure communication and drug discovery. I always have to think of how, like, a lot of people that talked about the moonlander, the Indian one, they emphasized how cheaply they have done it, how little money they spent on it. I find that so funny. And I would say 1 million euros in India goes a long way. So well done. Then in April 2023, the Institute announced that it had signed a memorandum of understanding with the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, to collaborate on research in space science. This collaboration will focus on developing new technologies for space exploration and monitoring. And then in May 2023, the Institute announced that it had launched a new research center on artificial intelligence. This center will bring together experts from different disciplines to work on developing new AI-based applications for healthcare, education, and other sectors. Wow, it's just 3 months. Yeah.
A mind-blowing what going on there. And that's just this year. That's just, I took sort of the creme de la creme of the news, in this year alone. So it's still very much very significant. And on their site, you can see, the prime ministers in India, going and acknowledging, maybe opened an institute for them. So it's quite embedded in India to this day. So that's really great to see. So the words here that Bose is saying, some, you know, what, nearly 100 years ago, for argument's sake, maybe 80 years ago, really have aged well, which is good to see. So through regular publication, the work of the Institute and these Indian contributions will reach the whole world, and they have done indeed. Brent?
Yeah, it'd be such a great place to work in, isn't it? Considering its history and its importance to India and the world.
Yeah, yeah. And really, the next sentence here really blew me away. The next paragraph actually blew me away when I read this again, because it wasn't in the back of my mind, you know, having remembered. So really reading this is fantastic. So he says that they will become, talking about the publications, they will become public property. No patents will ever be taken. The spirit of our national culture demands that we should forever be free from the desecration of utilizing knowledge only for personal gain. Now, that is just such a wonderful statement. And when you think about science and, you know, the benefits to humanity that it can bring, it's just a very awe-inspiring statement. And he doesn't hold back his words here. He uses desecration, the word desecration of utilizing knowledge for only for personal gain. Brian, what's your take?
Yeah, this is part of the reason why I said what I said earlier about the stifling of creativity in the world because of this approach. Even like, forget science, even in news, like the broadsheets in the United Kingdom, the basically the most accomplished writers usually work for the broadsheets, and to read their work you have to buy you have to pay to read their work. So it's just so crazy, and science is obviously not exempt from that, but this method of or this philosophy further emphasizes why this would be the best place in the world to work, isn't it? Like, for example, Mike earlier mentioned Indian Space Research Organization, and by the way, Mike, it's ISRO. That's what we say. You don't say ISRO. We just say ISRO. Is the I actually, when I was in university, I wanted to because I did some space stuff, some space modules. That was my minor, and I already wanted to go work in ISRO. So I just Googled and emailed random people in the company, and said I'll just come and work for free, but no one ever responded. Yeah.
As a recruiter, Frank, I like that initiative. I wish more people had it.
But yeah, this anti-capitalism approach is something that literally is a topic we could spend so long on, isn't it? It's like the highest form of altruism in terms of sharing of knowledge, and you just can't believe that it's in the Autobiography of a Yogi, isn't it? That just shows you how much it must be linked to spirituality, really.
Yeah, I wonder what they thought of you when they read your email and then said, "Oh, he's gonna work for free." It's like, he can't be Indian.
I want to lose it. Yeah, it's a joke. It must be a joke.
He spent too much time in England. Yeah, the whole system that we have right now, oftentimes in the capitalist system, often says that all the good things have to come from private initiatives. They can never come from the government. But if you think about research that creates public knowledge, it would have to come from a government or from some kind of public institution, right? So this is our conundrum, that we can. Some countries in the West do it better than others, but none of them do it really well. So we have this idea that when the government does something, it has to be bad, it has to be slow, it has to be, and then we don't put any money in it, and then it's always already failed before it even starts. So I think a country like India, if they would show us how to do this correctly, then maybe we can mimic that approach. But right now we can only that also drives our research a lot, right? Because we make discoveries where we put our money, right? And then if we have private companies that see this is a field that is promising, then they throw their billions at it, and then suddenly discoveries pop up. But it's hardly something that is driven with like public good in mind, I would say.
And we mentioned ISRO like quite often in the past few episodes, but like the recent missions, they're not commercializing them in the sense that they're freely giving away the findings and the data for people to analyze. So it seems like this philosophy, this ancient philosophy of the dissemination of knowledge, is still filtering into even the highest achievement, scientific and engineering achievements that India is going through right now.
Yeah, and who knows, maybe people in the scientific community have read these words and maybe were inspired by it. And we talk about the ripple effects that the publications are having, but maybe the philosophy behind them is actually having ripple effects, and might have more positive effects in the years to come. Who knows? But it's great to read. It was really awe-inspiring for me to read that. Somebody of his significance, coming out to make such a definitive statement. And it goes on to really say about the Bose's wish, that the faculties of the Institute be available so far as possible to workers from all countries. And a lovely statement there. And it's tied in to he was paying homage to a couple ancient universities, and he says he wanted to carry on the tradition in this country. So maybe he's setting a tradition in the modern time, but it does certainly go about the patents, the issues of patents, but certainly the tradition of having workers from all countries attend universities goes far back. It's 25 centuries in India, as they had two universities there, the Nalanda and the Taxila universities. And we do have a little bit on this. And Priyank just mentioned before we started recording that Taxila is mentioned a few times. Guruji mentions it a few times, Priyank.
In the autobiography later on, we'll go through it. More about like how some travelers experienced, some Greek philosophers experienced the university and their lecturers and sannyasis. So that's coming later.
Nice. We'll look forward to that. The Nalanda University was said to have 10,000 students, 2,000 teachers, and it lasted continually for almost 800 years. Now that is amazing, back from the 5th to the 12th century. So whenever I was reading that, it really just blew my mind, because I had no idea that existed. And it just goes to show maybe what was it, Professor Brown's message, Norman Brown's message, that there should be more Indian scholars in universities that really have the wider impact that India's had. Priyank?
The 2,000 teachers to 10,000 students, that's like a 1-to-5 ratio, and like the best universities in the world, they're judged by that ratio. So like the Oxfords and the Cambridges in the UK have like 1-to-10 ratio of lecturers to students, and the idea is you get more personal one-on-one time if you have a lower number of students, and that's probably one of the reasons why private schools in the UK do so well, because they've got less students. Teachers such as Lauren can give more of their energy, and hopefully I should be going to Nalanda University, as in the archaeological site, later this year, so I can report back.
Send pics.
It's not far from Ranchi, right? Nalanda. It's like in the vicinity. I'm sure it's hundreds of miles away. Somewhere same area. I find that interesting. I mean, the population numbers at this time were probably different than today. By today's standard, 10,000 students isn't a lot, but the ratio is great, right? 1 to 5 is really great. I feel like a lot of universities that are like public universities in Europe, they probably have way worse ratios than that. Like I know University of Vienna has around 100,000 students, and I don't think they have. How much would they have to have?
20,000
to be 1 to
staff.
10.
Oh,
20,000 staff.
No, well, in this ratio, it'd be what 20,000 that need
20,000 professors, right? I very much doubt that. They probably have 1,000 professors. And
what country is Vienna in? Sorry, Mike.
Österreich.
Oh,
there we
yes.
go.
There you go.
Yes.
Before this podcast, listeners, we learned a new word.
Yeah, how to pronounce Austria in its native language, in German. Since countries start to renaming themselves to their their names in their native languages, I think that's a good thing. Anyways, it would be interesting to also visit the modern University of Nalanda, because I would want to know how much of those ancient traditions they incorporated, and if maybe one day this will be a place for scholars and researchers of all over the world to come again. That'd be interesting to know.
Yeah, it says on the Wikipedia page that the ruins revealed that the university had a seamless coexistence between nature and man, and between learning. That's so cool. But I don't think you could quite do that as readily in Ireland, given the nature. So you'd have to travel all the way to India for that.
And Guruji writes quite a lot about schools and schooling, and he often mentions that classes should be outside, right, under a tree, and that would make the students calmer and create an environment for rapid learning.
Yeah, I should say, Mike, although 10,000 students is low, but if that was 5th century, that could be like 50 million people or something. I think it's really 50, maybe 100 million in the later centuries of the population, of India. So, pretty impressive stuff. And Taxila, then, just to mention a little bit about this, according to John Marshall, who's an English archaeologist, who's the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India. He said that in early Buddhist literature, Taxila is frequently mentioned as a university center where students could get instruction in almost any subject, religious or secular, from the Veda to mathematics and medicine, even to astrology and archery. The role of Taxila as a center of knowledge grew stronger under the Mayura Empire and Greek rule, Indo-Greeks, in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. In the early centuries AD, it was a prominent center of Buddhist scholarship as well. So it's really, really quite nice to hear a little bit about that and what Guruji is so affectionately referring to throughout the Autobiography of a Yogi. And that is really just a beautiful ideal, isn't it? That the peoples, from all over the world should be able to come. Should be no patents, no public property. It's just a real beautiful sort of higher yoga sort of thinking there displayed by Mr. Bose. So finally, then we can come on to the pursuit of truth, is what I'm calling this, and really it's the last paragraph that we're going to look at, and there's a large footnote in here that we'll cover because it's super interesting. But we'll touch on, I think, would be the way to say this. So what's happening here? Well, it's said here, although science is neither of the East nor of the West, and I'm sure Guruji loved every word of that. This is Bose talking. He says, but rather international in its universality. Yet India is specifically fitted to make great contributions. so yeah, I'm sure Gurji loved hearing that and concurred with every word. And why would India be fitted, especially fitted to make such contributions? And this is where the footnote comes in. And so we can delve into that now. So the footnote really says, but before I jump into it, Priyank, do you want to?
Yes, earlier we mentioned that it was a continuous living tradition, and that the disciplines that the Indic disciplines that Professor Norman talked about, the Indic phases of discipline, and we didn't know what they were, and Guruji doesn't really elaborate in this, in the autobiography here, but Taramata, I think, has read our minds. She knew we were going to do this podcast, and hence in 1934 produced this article that we're going to talk about right now, which I think is related to those questions we had before.
Nice. So the atomic structure, and this is in the footnote, was atomic structure of matter was well known to the ancient Hindus. And that is just, whenever I first read this, I love topics of, ancient civilizations and, yogas and all this stuff. So I thought, wow, cool. So yeah, it really stirred a sort of childish curiosity in me. So one of the 6 systems of Indian philosophy is, I think the way to say it, Priyank, correct me if I'm wrong here, is Vaisheshika.
Yep, sounds good.
Like more of an inch. From the Sanskrit root visas, atomic individuality, of the foremost Vaisheshika expounders was Aulukya, also called Kananda, the atometer. What a name, called the born around 2,800 years ago. So this individual called Kananda, the atom eater, some 3,000 years ago, went into his own experience and really was able to delve through the veil of Maya, through illusion, not by scientific exploration, but by going inward, it seems. So this is a real significant part that we've talked about before in some ways, to say that the world of science and the world of yoga comes sort of full circle, and inevitably they're intrinsically linked. But here we have the atom eater some 3,000 years ago, and we'll talk about him a little bit now. So in an article by Taramata, Taramata, sorry, in East West, April 1934, a summary of the Vaisheshika scientific knowledge was given as follows. So through the modern atomic theory, though the modern atomic theory is generally considered a new advance of science, it was brilliantly expounded long ago by Kananda, the atom eater. The Sanskrit anus can be properly translated as atom in the latter's literal Greek sense of uncut or indivisible. Other scientific expositions of Vaisheshika treatises of the BC era include, and there's 10 aspects here that the atom eater was able to parse through his own experience. So we'll go through them one by one. So firstly, he talked about the movement of the needles towards magnets. Secondly, the circulation of water in plants. Thirdly, the akash or ether, inert and structureless, as a basis for transmitting subtle forces. Fourth, the solar fire as the cause of all other forms of heat. And fifth, the heat as the cause of molecular change. Sixth, the law of gravitation as caused by the quality that inheres the what's that word?
Inheres.
Yeah. Thank you. Inheres in earth atoms to give them their attractive power or downward pull. Well, we sort of know what that might be. The kinetic nature of all energy. causation is always rooted in an expenditure of energy or a redistribution of motion. And hint, hint, we should know what that one is. Universal dissolution through the disintegration of atoms, another really important one, and the radiation of heat and light rays, infinitely small particles darting forth in all directions with inconceivable speed. And this is interjected here to say that it's the modern cosmic rays theory. And finally, 10th, the relativity of time and space. So these are all really, really significant findings. And I just played around with it a little bit and tried to search each and every one of them to see when, you know, the Western science field would claim as to when they came up. As to when they were officially discovered. And I got hits of 17th century, 18th, 19th, 20th century. You know, Einstein's theory of relativity is in there. The Newton's gravity, theory of gravity is in there. And they're all essentially 18th, 19th, 17th century. So oddly, though, I was talking to AI, and I'll say, you know, what I did here. I was talking to AI in the Bard and ChatGPT, and I said, okay, well, you know, when were these theories discovered? You know, when was this recognized? And it told me all the modern findings. But whenever I pushed it to say, hey, do you know about the Vashishka? Do you know about this individual Kananda? And I said, yes, you know, it is aware of it. And I said, well, did this individual discover this in some way? And I almost broke the AI because it had to really think, and it paused, and I kind of looked at it and I didn't think it was going to come up with it, but it actually said yes. You know, when I really pushed it, it said yes, actually, but it simply said it was a philosophy. So the differential here, as is correct, is to say that it is not a scientific finding as we would say it's a modern scientific finding, but it's more of a philosophical finding is how it defined it. But every single one it agreed, apart from with the 9th and 10th, the cosmic rays theory and the relativity of time and space. It couldn't understand that this individual came up with it. But I just thought it was interesting that even it, when pushed, recognized that, yeah, Kananda was one of the first in recorded history to really discover these topics.
Really fascinating investigative work, Chris. Today, when people were reading these 10 fields of expositions, they call them, and treaties, did anyone feel that they're very closely related to Kriya and all the various facets of Guruji's teachings? There's no doubt Dharamata would have had that in mind when she was composing this article, which I couldn't find, by the way. I tried to look on the archives for this 1934 East West magazine. I couldn't find. So if someone can find it, please do put a link on the comments for us, and then that might be useful. But yeah, all of these I felt that were really quite esoteric, and there's some metaphysical ones as well as physical sciences ones, and a lot of it related to how we do our practices, from things like you know, how we raise our hands for and project the healing energy towards the world, like he said, the radiation of heat and light in infinitely small particles darting forth in all directions. And Guruji says, you know, our hands become like you know, they become the antennas when we're focusing that healing prayer outwards, and also energization, you know, the descriptions of energization, that where we're gathering energy and healing in our bodies, and also the breathless state and living by, you know, energy and creation as opposed to the oxygen that's coming in through the air. So I felt like there was lots of Kriya elements in all of that, and even things like fasting and the benefits of fasting is got feelings from that in there as well.
Yeah. I thought the same when I was reading through. So glad I'm not the only one. on that note, there was plenty really to delve into beyond that and around this subject. Maybe we can link to some reading material if anybody really is keen to jump into. There's a great bit of information really on Wikipedia on Cananda. And I thought actually it was interesting that the name was spelt with a dot beneath the N, and then there's something above the A, like a little squiggle. Sorry, I don't know the technical word for that. But Cananda, spelt differently in Wikipedia than it is in the Autobiography of a Yogi. Presuming the Wikipedia one's correct, because yeah.
I think the system of writing Sanskrit in English changed, and it became more evolved. And this is what that's why they're using these accents and these dots now to go to the how it's pronounced. So the dot with the N at the dot with the bottom. If you can see what in the wiki page what the Sanskrit word is, so that means it's a Kannada. It's like that, and the A with the accent is R, so it's Kannada. It's something like that.
Yeah, nice. Look, I'm glad we have you here for that.
Someone who knows Sanskrit, like this guy got it completely wrong.
So you can't call him Canada.
You can't. Yeah, exactly. I was thinking about you, Mike. We can't call him Canada anymore, you know. So super fascinating, individual. Really was able to parse apart the nature of reality through his own discernment, really. And it goes on to say that the recent discovery of the atom, being a miniature solar system, would be no news to the old Vashishka philosophers, who also reduced time to its furthest mathematical concept by describing the smallest unit of time, a kala, as the period taken by an atom to traverse its own unit of space. No, but whenever I was looking this up, super fascinated about it, I found a very long description, let's say, which I will not go into now as much as I would like to, in the Bhagavad Gita on the measurement of time. And it's just fascinating because it goes on and on and on about all the ways to measure time. I'll check through again, and if we can share this link, I will do, because really fascinating. However, whenever I was searching Kala, as a unit of time measurement, I kept finding 58 seconds. So, on various websites, various kind of information boards, I was finding this unit of time was 58 seconds, which is not, as I understand it, to be as described here as the smallest unit of time. I think it would be longer than 58 seconds. So I did think that, with regard to the yogas, and the measurement of time in the grander scale, there is some, I suppose, discrepancy there between one school of thought and another. Or maybe it actually comes down to something like this. What is the smallest measurement in it? How do atoms spin? Because apparently there's like an active and inactive sort of coupling of atoms, and then they actually rotate around themselves. So as the period taken by an atom to traverse its own unit of space is actually a rotation of the atoms, which is something interesting. And then that actually goes, on and on and on and on. And we end up talking about, these grand, amounts of eras, times in the forms of yugas and things that are quite significant to us. But anyway, so I thought there's some discrepancies that I found online, but essentially I would take this word as verbatim, as truth. And we have various discoveries here made by the atometer, Cananda, we'll say for now, which is super good to read. But finally, we'll look at the last part of the paragraph. And maybe, Priyank, I'll get you to read the first little bit out from the Burning Indian Imagination up to the A.
Burning Indian imagination, which can extort new order out of a mass of apparently contradictory facts, is held in check by the habit of concentration.
Yeah. Lauren, could you read the second part?
This restraint confers the power to hold the mind to the pursuit of truth with an infinite patience.
Mike, finish us off with the last sentence. 2 sentences, please.
Where is it?
From the tears stood in my eyes. The B1. And the last card.
Chris, would you like to read it out? I think might
Yes.
be.
Yeah.
So, tears stood in my eyes at the scientist. This is Yogananda now talking. Tears stood in my eyes at the scientist's concluding words. Is patience not indeed a synonym of India, confounding time and the historians alike? Really, really nice. Frank?
So patience and concentration was keys, you might say. And the benefits are really beautifully extolled here. And I also think that he's also obviously complementing the Indian temperament of having a lot of patience. And if you go to India, you'll see that they do have a lot of patience even now to deal with all the chaos, all the bureaucracy, getting things done. But there's also this. I'd say this qualifies as the third of the Guruji's patriotic proclamations in the Autobiography of a Yogi. The second one was actually previously in this chapter when he was speaking to those professors, and he had some racial pride in India could play a leading part in physics and not just metaphysics. And then previous to that was when Guruji talked about the embarrassed scholars and skeptic time, when he was talking about the Kali temple, with the words of that philosopher. So third moment in counting, and I think there will be more.
My spoiler alert there, Paul. Yeah, there will be for sure. And it was such a strong and moving way to finish this part, at least of this chapter. That Guruji's standing there with, he's got tears in his eyes at the scientist's concluding words of patience, concentration, of India's imagination. So these concepts that we've talked about, the power of the mind, really, really strong. We'll link to a lot of content that we've talked about today. So there's vast amounts of content here to cover. And please feel free to share any insights, any wonderful revelations that you do have, listeners, on your own studies and journeys. But for now, I think we have covered the part that we have one or two more parts left, likely in this chapter, that Mike will cover next, and then Priyank will finish the chapter off in the episodes to come. So guys, anything from you? Do you have anything that you'd like to add before we end the show? Really good spiritual messages across that section, wasn't there, for us? I thought when I first remembered reading this chapter, I just remembered it being about science as opposed to life lessons, of which there's lots. Yeah, and it just shows how to live lessons. Yeah, how to live lessons, and the pursuit of the science in plant life might not be this immediate. You might not be thinking about physics and all these other subjects that we talked about that the Bose Lab has went on to influence and kind of touch on, but certainly the spiritual pursuit is not cannot be separated from the pursuit of science. And it's beautiful to delve into more details. Thanks, listeners, for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next episode. Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.